Alright everyone, so we had a look, didn't we, earlier in the week at what went through as we went and we trimmed and we made sense of the data sets so that you could actually start to take what's quite unstructured at the beginning and add some structure to it so it can then be used as a structured data set for reporting. So we looked at the lab and the test information or the inspected by information from the New York water towers. Now the thing that really introduces is around what actually happens in M, okay? How does M actually work? And that's, I think, one of the bits that if you're going to do any data modeling, you have to get your head around and you have to understand. So let's go through, have a look and see what's going on within M. Alright, so here we are, okay? We're in the whiteboard in a minute, just so I can mark this up a bit easier, right? This is the query source that we've got for our tested by table that we've got in Excel, okay? Now, one of the things that we can do in here and that we can see is that we've got lines somewhere. So we've got each line is going this way, right? And it's natural to think like this. And this is how I thought about Power Query when I first started to do it. So the natural thought process is it's moving down, it's going from the top down, isn't it? That's what's happening, okay? And there's nothing wrong with thinking like that because that's logical and that's how the human mind works. Okay, let's get rid of the ruler. Let me get the rubber, what I wanted. Okay, the reality is that's not what happens. So what's actually happening is you've got this let clause and you've got an in clause. Okay, now that's the key bit that you need to understand. So what we're actually saying under let is we're defining functions. So what are the functions that we are going to use within this query, okay? And the query itself is actually just this bit here, this expanded changed type. That's the only part that is the query. So in order to reconcile that expand change type, okay, so we say, right, we're going to do this query here, right, but to do that, we're going to take a table and we're going to expand some columns in it, and we're going to expand, and the table is going to be this merged queries. So merged queries actually is this one here, isn't it? Okay? And so on and so forth. And you can follow back through and see. Now the tricky bit that you've got in here, if we highlight it, is we've got remove duplicates and we've got change type as the sources for our merged queries, which is the whole point, isn't it? So in order to do that, we've taken two tables, and those two tables are functions within that query. So the functions that we're looking at is this change type, which of course relates to changing the type for source 2, and then the one above, remove duplicates. And we're going to merge those two together to bring it forward. So we could do that a lot and do that regularly. So that leads us to the point, and the thing that I was saying last week that we need to remember, which is of course that things like this are bad. So I've referenced a value, okay? Now, if we're going top down, of course it makes sense because it's going to pull that that's already been built, but it's not, is it? Because we're going to go and now evaluate what does rows mean. So if we cut back to Excel, we can actually click and we can see rows, okay? Now, in terms of what's going on with rows, if we go and we say, right, let's have a look at the advanced editor for it, you can see there's not actually much happening there, right? We've pulled through from an Excel data source and we've put some data types to it, right? Now I do stuff like this often when I'm doing big data sources like this. And the reasoning for it is that gives me, in my development cycle, a point where everything else is going to come from there. So in terms of this, we've got the two queries that are going to be fed from here. So we've got the inspected by and we've got the tested by. So who carried out the inspection and which lab did they send the samples to? Now those are important bits of information, and that's all we need from here. In theory, if we needed more, we could do more. In theory, we could have each query pulling this whole thing through and it would be the same. But what you have to remember is at no point is using that temp table that you'll see me doing a lot actually preventing load, right? It will not do anything in terms of the amount of data traffic that your data flow or your Power BI query will run. Okay, if it gets to the point where you're saying we want to do something like this, there are ways. So if we were to do this with a pro subscription, I could use a data flow to pull through the raw, that main piece, and just say this is the data flow, and then use the PBIX file to actually go and do that final processing, because then it would just go and load from my data flow. There'd be less traffic going to the website. In your business, you might have a SQL database or another data source that you're using, and you could pull through raw tables into a data flow and then use PBIXs to process those and avoid the constant back and forth traffic against your database. If it gets to the point where you're going into premium, then you can actually have the data flow feeding the data flow. You could go down the route of going the full Azure Data Factory side as well, where you actually have Azure Data Factory reading the data source through into raw, and then using something like Databricks to go through and curate that into a curated data source, and then off you go. So one of the things that I want you to get is that just because you're doing something, and in this case we're doing it in Excel, doesn't mean it's not enterprise capable, okay? Because the whole stack that Microsoft offers is interchangeable with pieces. So you can use and leverage what would be your enterprise side with a small amount of data. And the point of saying, well, we're going to switch to using Azure Data Factory and then do it a bit more professionally is more around just the sheer quantity of data potentially. So if you don't have that quantity of data or that variety, you might find, well, premium is a more cost-effective solution because we can do almost everything that we would want to do in a premium environment using this, and the cost of premium is offset against what your cost of Azure would be. So one is not necessarily precluding the other or vice versa. There's not a right, there's not a wrong. This is a case of what's your use case and your requirement for your business, and what does your roadmap of development look like. So just as one last piece for today, I wanted to go through and just review a couple of things about the functions that you declare within your script, okay? And always thinking about the functions and actually what's going through with each piece that you build, okay? So this was the calendar starting point that we've put, and I put the link in for you to download it before. It's in the video. If you go calendar build, in the description of the video, you can copy this text out. Okay, the point of this was to get you started with your calendar. It's not necessarily perfect, it's not going to do everything you need, but it's a good starting point. So the main thing here was that as I was starting to look into it, I realized that this covers everything that we talked about in terms of the data types that you've got. Okay, so if we follow through all this, okay, most of these are tables, aren't they? This is a table. So you can recognize these are the step names down here, and then there's a code that they're going to execute up here. Okay, so we can work that through. So this one, we're going to add in the year, month, and it's going to pad. So you've always got two digit month. Okay, so that works, and it all follows through. Where I wanted to get to as well was around here. So we've got here, we've just got a list. This is a list, and we can see there's no data type for it, but it's a list, starts dates from there. Okay? And then up above there, we've got these scalar values. So we've got here the local date time. So where are we now? And we just wanted the date from that. Okay, so if we go into the advanced editor, you can see. So we've got scalar, scalar, scalar. Source is going to be a list because it says it's a list, and then we're going to convert that to a table and then follow on and do other things with tables because we're in table land.